Hi, everybody. Today, I wanted to talk about the energetics of forcing someone to do something that they don't want to do, because I feel there's a lot of that going on these days. So, the first thing to realize is the whole of us is a signal. Every part of us is a signal. The biggest part of that signal is the tension that we hold in our connective tissue from our past, mostly from the traumas that we hold inside, from our programming that we've experienced as a child, but also as the current day tension that we hold inside of us. So think about it. When we come across something that we don't like, maybe someone is doing something that we don't believe is right, we hold ourselves in tension. We are in resistance to what it is they are doing. Now, that resistance inside of us is actually tension. It's tension that we're holding in our connective tissue, maybe in our muscles, and we may not be aware of it. That is the key point. We hold so much tension inside, and a lot of us do not have the self-awareness to know that we are holding ourselves tense, but we are. Just because we're not aware of it does not mean it is not there. That tension is there and it is inside of us when we're resisting what someone else is doing. Now, in that moment where we're holding ourselves in tension, that is part of our signal. We are emitting a tense signal. So, guess what we're going to be attracting into our future? We're going to be attracting more tension. We're going to be attracting the same feeling that we are emitting right now is going to come back to us in our future. So now, if we want to change what someone else is doing because we don't like it, do you think they're going to like it? I think not, because we're telling them what they're doing is not right. So they themselves are going to be in tension. And we are going to be holding ourselves even more tense. We're going to be putting up those barriers, that resistance, holding ourselves so that they can't push back against it. So we are going to be emitting an even more tense signal. We are going to be attracting that resistance, that feeling again in our future. Now, it doesn't feel good, does it? To be that tense. So if we don't want to be that tense, then we don't want to be emitting that signal, because we're hurting our futures. When we're tense, we're hurting ourselves. When the other person is tense, they are hurting themselves, because that tension doesn't just melt away. It actually stays inside the body, unless we use a technique that helps it melt away. So how do we change that signal? How do we change our future, which is so important these days? Well, we need to first notice that we are feeling tension. It is there. We have to find a way to find it. And once we do, we have an ability to work with that tension, to work with that resistance, that dislike, that belief, whatever it is we're resisting, we can work with that resistance to let it go. So one of the key ways I recommend is a technique called EFT, which is short for emotional freedom technique. It's also called tapping, because we're tapping on the ends of meridians as we're talking through something. So I might be talking through a belief that perhaps women aren't supposed to do something because of some book that was written many, many years ago where someone else said that women weren't supposed to do something, or women were supposed to do something. Right? If I've got that belief, I can tap through that belief. Now, the key point here is not to suppress that feeling, right? We don't want to suppress that feeling and keep it stuck inside. We don't want to express it. So we don't want to tell that person to change because it doesn't go with my beliefs. What we have to do is find that belief and acknowledge it, accept it, feel it. So if I have a belief that women should have their face covered, I want to notice that belief. I believe that women should not show their faces. I believe that women should not show their faces because that's what I was taught. That's what this book that I've been reading says. That is the belief I have, and I've held that belief my whole life, and I believe it to be true. Right? I will tap through that belief over and over and over again until I can see deeper aspects of that belief. Maybe, well, who wrote this book? Who wrote this book, and what were they believing? Where did they get their belief from? Maybe it's not a belief that I need to believe these days because things have changed. Other aspects, other ideas, other thoughts will come to mind as we release the tension that we've been holding around these beliefs. And once they do, that tension inside starts to release and dissolve. And then when we see someone doing something again that we don't believe in, we won't feel quite as tense. So our signal that we're emitting in that moment will not be quite as strong. So that signal we're emitting comes back to us. So as we emit a tense signal that's not quite as tense as it used to be, what we get back in the future will not be quite as tense. Then if we notice it again and work with that tension at that point, let it go a little bit more. If we do that over and over again, eventually we will no longer be tense in that situation. At that point, we can see that situation differently. We may not react at all. We may totally allow the other person to be who they are, to do what they're doing, and to experience their own life, their own path, without us getting in the way. That then changes their signal. We're not pushing against them anymore. So that changes their future. Our future has also been changed because we're no longer resisting what's happening inside of us. We are at peace inside of us, and that is then what we're attracting into our future. Now, once we've released all that tension, it might be still that we don't like what they're doing. We might be able to tell them at that point, we don't like what they're doing. But the way we're going to tell them is different. That tension inside is not going to be there. So we can tell them with a very different tone in our voice, very different energy in our voice, and they're going to accept it in a very different way than they were before. That resistance, that pushing against is not going to be there. Or we might decide to let it go. And we might realize we don't need to change that other person at all. We have let the tension inside of us go, and we can just let it be. That changes everything, and it changes our futures. And if we want peace in our future, we need to learn to acknowledge how we're feeling inside of ourselves and work with that, and not try and change or blame other people around us. That is how we can take responsibility for what is happening in our lives and in our future. Thanks for joining me today. Please feel free to join me at any point. I'd love to have a conversation with you. These calls are free. Anyone can call in at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and I'll be here. I wait for about 10 to 15 minutes to see if anyone shows up. And if you do, I'll have a chat. Okay, have a good week. Bye-bye.